Hello, y'all. Going to be talking about evolving Kubernetes at the speed of trust. So this is going to be talk about KEPs. So again, if you are here to listen about Kubeflow or some other talk, you are in the wrong place. There must have been a mix-up with the schedule, so sorry about that. So a brief overview. I'll tell you who I am. And we'll mostly spend time talking about what the KEP process is, at least what I would like the KEP process to be. A little overview about where we are today, where I hope to go with the process, and ways to get involved, and acknowledgments for the people who've helped us get this far. So Caleb, buenas. I don't usually do this kind of slide, but this is about me. I've done stuff here, mostly in SIG release and SIG PM. Yeah. So now work at Pivotal, working on Kubernetes. So let's get right into it. What is the KEP process? Well, it's short for Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal. We've modeled this on the Rust RFC process and the Python PEP processes. The Rust RFC more to be a lightweight process that takes advantage of the fact that GitHub exists and is available worldwide, more or less. And then, people have opinions about it. What is the KEP process beyond based on these other processes? Some people, this is an evolution of the design proposal process that you may have remembered from the early days of Kubernetes if y'all were here. Thanks to Eric Toon for creating that process. There are, if you've been involved with the Kubernetes release process recently, you will have noticed that KEPs are becoming required to release your enhancement. So in that sense, that they also serve as a kind of a launch coordination checklist, which would be familiar, to you if you have a job at a big co. But for some people, any kind of process at all is just administrivia. Since I helped create this process, you may imagine I don't feel necessarily that way. So, I mean, really, this is me trying to sell you on what, at least how I think about the KEP process. So I think of KEP as kind of a precip, and we'll get into that in a bit. Really, I think it's a way that we, as a community, can solve the problem, the dynamic problem of what is Kubernetes. So that's as the thought experiment is, ship a thesis is kind of that metaphysical kind of thought experiment. And it's a way of keeping everyone in the loop because as humans we all like to be consulted before things change. It's superhuman nature. So precept. It's a definition on the slide there, general rule. But really it's at least I think about it as a way of thinking. What are the questions you should be asking yourself when you're about to, or you're thinking about shipping a large enhancement to Kubernetes? It's just a kind of a guideline to help you surface common problems we've experienced in the community. We certainly are not, I guess, trotting brand new ground. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Other large communities, particularly the OpenStack Foundation, have given us a lot of information about kind of what works and what does not, what you should be concerned about when you're proposing a feature, or if you are an operator, when a new Kubernetes release is coming out, kind of what are you concerned about? And we want to, in an ideal world, surface a lot of this stuff in the open source project itself, so it's available to anyone, and it's not trapped as in a silo someplace at a large corporation, because the Kubernetes is a community project, and without y'all here, we wouldn't be able to do it. So I really like I went to a wonderful talk in San Francisco from a former DARPA program manager. She was talking about her work in synthetic biology, and she opened her talk with a point to the Heilmeier tachism, and hopefully you can read that in the back there. But this is kind of, at least in the early days of DARPA, and if you're not familiar with DARPA, it's a military research agency in the United States. I guess what are some of the things they're famous for? Those lasers that tried to intercept missiles, the internet, kind of the DARPA's greatest failures and greatest hits. But what I really like about it is like really the first point. And this speaks to Russ Cox's blog post towards Go 2 when it's really talking about for an open source project, as a maintainer, you may not be familiar with someone's use case, and it's really important to help motivate, why are you trying to make a change, so we can all understand and agree that that's within scope or not. So that's kind of like, what is Kubernetes? This is a question we have to ask ourselves all the time because it's changing and evolving all the time. So this is something I really love. Now to the ship of Theseus. It's a thought experiment. It's the basic premise is if you replace all the planks in a ship, is that the same ship, more or less, right? So you can imagine then for a software project, if you change all the components, or after the 10 years, are we still talking about Kubernetes? Don't know. But KEP is a way of trying to find that out. Because we try every now and again to enumerate the full scope of what Kubernetes is, and one that takes a long time because what Kubernetes is depends on how you're using it. Some people are using Kubernetes in their retail stores. Some people are using Kubernetes out on oil derricks. Some people are using Kubernetes, at CERN, and those are my favorite talks. To actually hear, CERN engineers talk about the data science they're doing with both Kubernetes and OpenStack. It's amazing how many different use cases there are. And so if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different use cases for what's important to you. And so this we have to figure all this out as a community. And this goes to a basic basic need for humans to feel like they are involved in decisions which affect them. We're a very large project, and if you've tried to keep up with all the goings on, I'm sure you've felt that there's just a lot going on all the time, and you want to have as many opportunities to get as many eyes on a proposed enhancement as possible. The bugs are only shallow if people are able to see them. It's the important part there. So that's basic human need that we're trying to do at scale. There are well over 1,000 contributors on a regular basis to Kubernetes, and it is very hard to keep everyone aligned and moving together. So kind of what is the state of KEPs today? People are writing KEPs. That's awesome. As a person who worked on this quite a bit, it's really exciting to see people using something you helped come up with. We've extracted last year KEP content from Kubernetes community, which if you subscribe to that repository, it's quite noisy. And so this is an attempt to help get more better signal to noise ratio, people who are just interested in enhancements. So they're now at Kubernetes Enhancements. Unfortunately, there are some limitations of our original design. A single flat file, especially if you look at some of the kubeadm KEPs, you see if you're trying to include like diagrams, it's really challenging, and there's no easy convention to do that, and it ends up making things like searching and sorting much more challenging, especially because metadata is just embedded in that single flat file. And if you ever tried to extract the structured text from an unstructured larger mass, I'm sure you can agree it's challenging. Because of all of this, well, one, because of the size of the community, and for how many different audiences need to look at KEPs. There's the SIG that is sponsoring a KEP. There's SIG architecture, which has purview over large API, really any API changes to Kubernetes. There's the release team, which has to understand what risk is being introduced in any individual release, both for consuming and as a new release goes out the door. This is the #1 question, at least the SREs that I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with will want to know. What's in the release? How do I know if it's working? How do I know if it's not? And what does it depend on, and what depends on it? And these are the questions that I'm sure everyone who operates any software of any kind wants to have answered. And there needs to be a place for that. But unfortunately, because of the various different audiences, it means that the template itself is rather long. And it's right now, we've added also a actual release checklist, and it's really kind of unwieldy to work with now. So that's because there's basically no tooling. It's difficult to get this stuff sponsored and out the door. But I've been working with some others on a KEP prototype that is under development. I'll maybe say more about that later. But talk about where we want to go, and this is really about tooling. So we've got a process, and that's worked well enough. There's definitely pain points. There's definitely growing pains. But if you look at, we agreed on a second KEP that defines where we want to go. So it's KEP 1A. That has us moving from a single flat file to a directory structure. It has more structured metadata that's separate from that flat file. So you can actually operate on it safely with tooling and consume KEPs in an automated fashion. So we have the community site, which is Hugo generated static site, and it'd be great to be able to surface like new KEPs or KEPs that have been open for a month without any comment. One of the things I think the Rust project mentions as being important for helping keep development active and the project moving forward is having a final comment period. And there's not an easy way of doing that if you can't easily ascertain when a KEP was created or when it was last updated. So there's a lot of life cycle and good housekeeping kind of stuff. If you spend time in SIG architecture, you will know or follow the mailing lists that reviewer bandwidth is really at a premium, and it is every release of a release. There are unfortunately people who just get blocked and aren't able to get their enhancement in because there was no time to review it. And so making that process easier and allowing that review process to begin earlier, and also trying to surface kind of the workload of maintainers is another important design goal for the next stage of KEP, because people are burning out, and that does not make a sustainable project by definition. Also, if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me. But there's gonna be plenty of time to ask all the questions you have about what KEPs are, where we're going, what's going on. Also, getting the automated integration with the enhancement tracking process. So if you try to ship an enhancement in either 1.15 or 1.14, you may have found to your consternation that you're doing a bunch of copy pasting between your KEP and the enhancements tracking repository. And so there's not any good reason for that. I can't tell you that you just love it. Everyone loves copying and pasting. They don't. And so reducing that kind of friction is another important goal for the project. And ways to get involved. So today, one of the real challenges, if you look at the KEP content, there is not always enough attention paid to explaining in prose why an enhancement is important. Who is it for? And this gets back to the Heilmeier catechism. That part is super important. Way before you get to the architectural design, you need to get agreement as to why something is important. And this is a great opportunity for people who maybe aren't involved directly with the development of a proposed enhancement to contribute in other ways. Not all contributions are code, and without all the non-code contributions, again, we would not have a project. Certainly, if there's no documentation, there is no actual release. If you are a KEP author, one thing that's really helpful is if you can clear out the template sections that you're not using. So particularly the release checklist, if you're not releasing your KEP immediately, so for vast release cycle, you should probably just remove it, because it makes it difficult for people who are following along to know what is active or not, because you have to already know what the template looks like to remove it in your mind. And that's just more friction for people. So it's like keeping your KEPs kind of, lint free in that way would help a lot. If, once we are moving to a directory structure, we're gonna need a lot of help in making this content available and easily consumable by consumers. So we use Hugo in many other parts of the project to do this kind of work. And certainly I have not had the time to explore how that is going to change when we move from flat files we have today to a directory structure. So, that's a super help wanted, general Hugo experience. Or if you've got, your favorite static site generator, and anything that runs in a container is generally fine. And if you download the slides here, you can get a link there. But there's a preview version of the KEP-Cuddle tool. Total prototype does not work. Is not fit to be released yet. But that is where I spent a lot of time trying to sketch out a prototype that we can get in front of people, get in front of maintainers to start playing around with. I've gotten a little bit of feedback from what I've shown, developed thus far. And if you were at KubeCon Copenhagen, you may have seen a demo from Jason and I showing that work at that point. After some additional feedback, we've started to make a bunch of changes that kind of reduce the handoffs between a KEP author and a KEP maintainer. So trying to also introduce more productivity enhancements, like automatically having the pull request filed for you. That's kind of what we're trying to go, in this next iteration. So that's taken a bit of time. Yeah, trying to coordinate both Git and GitHub operations is kind of tricky sometimes. But it has taken quite a lot of hard work across the project to get to even where we are today. And I would like to this opportunity before we get into questions to say thanks to a lot of the people who have made this possible. So first, I would like to say thanks to Jace. Jace, I don't know if you are fortunate enough to know him, but he has been with the project since the early days. He came in from Dace before the Microsoft acquisition, and he is an amazing person. He's one of the most thoughtful people I personally know. He thinks so much about how planning should work and how to deliver value to the users. He thinks about all parts of that, from testing, from how do you describe a change, to how do you document a design proposal, to how do you get that, how do you write code that implements that, and how do you put that code under test, how do you get that code in the hands of other people. Just the whole software delivery pipeline. He's fun. I'd like to thank my old boss, Brandon Phillips, who sponsored a lot of this work. It is not easy, and certainly not when we were a small, scrappy startup, to have a person working full time on project health initiatives. It's like a strategic project improvement, work stream that does not have any immediate commercial relevance to us as a startup, and to have that kind of foresight and vision, it's unique. Thank you also to Joe, who's my co-author on the KEP process itself. Stephen Augustus, he did all of the legwork really in getting the KEP 1A alignment and approval to get us to even starting to work on addressing some of the problems with the first version of KEP. Philip Whitrock, another good friend of mine, who provided a lot of some helpful engineering review for the first prototype that we demoed at Copenhagen. Aaron Krickenberger was instrumental. That was his decision to start making KEPs a required part of the release process. And so, really grateful for the work in to adopt and to really extend a process that, still in its infancy. So he did a lot of work on that, so that's really helpful. Brian Grant and I had a bunch of conversations about trying to establish kind of provenance for any enhancement. This is, yeah, again, every operator that I've ever met would like to know what the why a particular enhancement landed. Because if you're looking at this after the fact, it's really hard to piece this stuff together, especially over hundreds of commits and pull requests that go into each and every release. Tim Hawken also gave pretty useful feedback about trying to further improve kind of the productivity from a developer standpoint, to doing things like making those pull requests early and minimizing the handoff between a KEP author and a KEP reviewer. So that was really helpful feedback. Eric Toon also provided a lot of feedback on KEP 1A. And as the original author of the design proposal process, his input was invaluable in trying to iterate on that for the first version of KEP. And the whole Kubernetes community who's had to put up with it, us rolling out a new process as we go. Awesome. So I guess we are out time. Gracias and preguntas. Per release, it varies. It's in the dozens. Yeah, so the enhancements every release is somewhere between 10 and 20-ish landing. Well, as KEPs have become requirement for releasing, it's gone up. So that's one of the ticks there. The question was any question or any integrations planned with DevStats. I mean, yes, as a Kubernetes repository, there's the ability to do that. I haven't thought about it specifically, so I don't have any plans yet, but it is a possibility to get more stats on contributors there. One thing that would be really nice, and one thing we're trying to do, is to have the ability to associate individual pull requests against like Kubernetes or like some other repository with the KEP itself, to try and kind of roll up all these like disparate contributions into one larger kind of epic or something, if you're familiar with kind of the agile terminology. Yeah, so SIGs have generally, or seem to have generally adopted either the KEP process wholesale or have some modified version of it. So cluster lifecycle for cluster API, they're writing a bunch of KEPs. They store those outside of the centralized Kubernetes enhancements directory. Some other SIGs, they're free to do that as well. It's not a top-down, you have to use this process. We want to make it useful to the SIG. So SIG architecture is one of the, I guess, larger components of it. SIG release, it's mandatory to ship now. So you are going to, I guess it's going to spread virally like that. It depends per SIG. I mean, I've talked with some maintainers who want to see basically if it's anything larger than like a 2-line pull request to see a KEP. It really depends. For something that's changing an API, almost certainly you will need a KEP. It really depends on your SIG, and SIGs are free to decide their own criteria. It's not, yeah, it's again a pretty decentralized or federated model. So the question was, what is the minimum bar to have a KEP versus just a normal PR? And it depends on your SIG, but yeah, I feel that SIGs are moving towards more and more using KEP. So the question is, how long does a KEP live? And it's supposed to live throughout the entire conception and either to retirement or general availability. So the KEPs are supposed to be a living iterative document that you update frequently as changes come in. And one of the real challenges we've had as a community is coming up with good graduation criteria. So moving APIs or new enhancements from alpha to beta to general availability. And in the old days, used to be if you were just in one release as alpha, more or less the next release you could be in as beta. But now that the project has grown so large, we need more, it needs to be much easier for contributors or just interested people in the wider ecosystem or community to be able to do their due diligence. What's being used? How are people successful with an enhancement before trying to graduate it through general availability? Because there's a lot of, I guess, it is. So if you have been through the TPR to CRD conversion, I guess, trauma, that is kind of what I'm talking about. So if you bet on an API and you're not tethered to its usage before you rev it, that can be really painful for your users. And so trying to avoid that. In the same way that Go has a bunch of experience reports, doing that same thing on an enhancement by enhancement basis. So you can actually have good usage-based criteria. Like I really struggled to believe that something could go from alpha to beta without at least a few documented uses of people being successful. How would you know? How would you have gotten feedback? And it's important, at least for me, to get this information out of the silos where they usually live and to make it available for everyone, because that should not be a competitive advantage, just how much you've used Kubernetes, at least in my mind. All right. Well, if that is it, all to the keynotes. Thank you all for coming.